Hey, hockey fans, welcome to the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Retta. You know, I've spent over 4 decades working in the game of hockey, fortunate enough to meet some of the great legends of the game, saw them come into the league, watched them shine in the game, and now they've moved on to life after the game. The 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast gives us a chance to catch up, tell some great stories, relive some great memories, and hear what they're up to today. Today's legend, the Stanley Cup champion who played almost 700 games in the NHL in 13 seasons, a tough, hard-nosed right winger for the Habs, the Bruins, and the Rangers, known in hockey circles by his nickname Knuckles, holds the NHL record for most career penalty minutes by an American-born player, one of only 9 players to have amassed over 3,000 career penalty minutes in the NHL. Since retiring, he's had some off-ice battles with addiction and some, like a lot like he had hockey battles, but he's met those challenges head on and come out on the other side of it. Please welcome the host of the Raw Knuckles podcast, my buddy, Chris Nilan. Chris, welcome to the show, my friend.
Gino, thanks for having me, pal. Good to see you.
It's been a while. It's been a while since you and I have been able to connect. How are you doing?
Life is good. You know, listen, I certainly had my share of struggles during my post-career, which I've battled through and continue on a daily basis to battle through those struggles. But life is good. I'm living here in Montreal. I started the podcast, Raw Knuckles podcast, which I love doing. A lot of fun. You know, sometimes it's a little difficult to get guests, which is, you know, kind of something that you really got to work at. And I hate hounding people, but I do. And, you know, I'm just, I'm involved in the community here and Liam Foundation, do a lot of work with the Liam Foundation, which is a buddy of mine. His son has a rare mitochondrial disease. And I've been doing a lot of work with Kevin and the Montreal Children's to raise money for them. But yeah, so life is good. Living back here, I am an ambassador with the Habs, which was an honor that I just could never imagine was going to come my way. And I've always loved the organization, feel indebted to the organization for what they've done for me. And life is good. Life is good.
You know what I always appreciate about you, Chris, and there's so many things I appreciate. We'll get into it over the next little while. Is you're real appreciative. You're real appreciative. You know, I've listened to your podcast, and you and I have worked together in the past for a while, and I watched you as a broadcaster and as a fan. You always seemed to go out of your way to acknowledge the people that have been part of your life and impactful in your life. Where does that come from? The fact that that's so important for you to get that out there?
Well, it certainly starts with my parents, you know, my mom and dad. My dad was a man of really integrity, backbone, and he was a morally sound person, and he had great values, and he tried to impress those upon me. Now, I'll never forget, you know, him telling me one day after I come out of the forum, after a game, he was waiting in the garage and people would say, "Oh, can I get a picture, get an autograph?" And I was signing and stuff. And afterwards, he pulled me aside and he said, "Listen," he said, "that's all great and everything." He said, "You better keep your friggin' feet on the ground and don't ever big cheese anybody, think you are king shit, because you're not. You know, you're just a hockey player. You should be grateful for that." And he never failed to remind me of that. God bless him. And you know, that certainly rubbed off on me. There's no question about it. I was always taught in my household to respect my elders, be polite, be a good person. And listen, I've failed at times. There's no question about it. And I take full credit for that, and I always will. And that's another thing. You know, my father hated liars, and it's one thing I'm not, is a liar. And he taught me to be true to myself too, and he taught me to stick up for people that can't, for whatever reason, stick up for themselves. And that's something I always did in my life, and I continue to do, and I will to the day I die. And yeah, So those values really come from my parents. And honestly, when I look back, I'm really grateful for having the relationship I did with my coach when I was in minor league hockey, Judge Paul King. All my coaches in minor hockey, but Judge Paul King was just an incredible human being. He was an incredible guy in my life. He was almost like my other dad. He saw something in me that a lot of people didn't. He is the reason that I got drafted by the Montreal Canadiens. He was friends with Dickie Moore and Doug Harvey, and he asked Dickie and Doug if they would go to St. Pollock and do them a favor and just draft me and get me to come to training camp. And I only found this out about the judge when he passed away. I had met Dickie at the judge's funeral, and we went for lunch afterwards. And Dickie said, the judge never wanted me to tell you, but the reason why the Canadians drafted you is because he had asked me and Doug to go to St. Pollock and do him a favor and just draft Chris, take him with the last pick, whatever. And here's what the judge said to Dickie. He said, you just draft Chris Nilan and he'll do the rest. And when Dickie told me that, I was blown away. And as a, when I look back and I think about the judge, like I always knew, like I was one of his favorites. He was great with kids. He had arthritis, sit in the court all day, hunched over. He would come down the rink at night after he had 6 kids of his own. He had one Down syndrome boy, and this guy was an incredible human being. And he would take me for pizza. We'd talk. He would always talk about the Canadians. I was like, why does this guy like the Canadians so much? But, and I find out after he's dead and gone that he said that to Dickie, and that's how I get drafted by the Canadians. And I'm forever grateful to the judge, Dickie, and Doug Harvey for, sticking their necks out and getting me an opportunity.
It's amazing. But then the door gets open, but then you got to prove yourself. You've got to deliver, because they said, like the judge said, you give him an opportunity, he'll do the rest. So the Habs take you in the 13th round. You mentioned this.
Well, 17th or 19th. People say it was 231 out of 230.
231 overall. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next major person that steps into your life, you need a guy who believes in you, who's willing to give you a chance, who's willing to give you some room to grow. And we were talking about this guy a couple of shows ago when I had Pierre Turgeon on the show, who's going into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And he said, by far, the greatest coach he ever played for was Jacques Lemaire. And this was a guy who ended up becoming extremely impactful in your life and your transition to the NHL as well.
Yeah, it was huge. Well, it first started with Claude Ruel. The year I was drafted with the Canadians, I was their last pick, and Danny Jeffrion was at first. And the Boomer was coaching that year, my first year. I came to training camp, got sent to Halifax. I went down to Halifax, and I was fighting every night. I had one fight, Glenn Cochran, cut him open. Next thing, everybody wanted to fight me. Anyway, I come up, Boomer got let go, and Claude Ruel brought me up. And he really worked with me every day. He just saw that I was hungry and I wanted to work and I wanted to learn. And he was a teacher. So he worked with me. After Claude, Bob Berry came, and then Jacques came. And when Jacques came, he not only continued that teaching, Claude Ruel taught me to work, hard and work on certain things, those fundamentals. But when Jacques came in, he kind of refined it with me. And he got specific with me. Things I really had, like with Claude, I worked on everything. Yeah. And not that I didn't with Jacques, but Jacques, he would take me at the center faceoff circle, and he'd stand at the edge with a puck, and he'd move it certain areas. I had to react to the puck. And he would tell me, you're working on your foot speed, you're crossing over. We got to work on getting you quicker. And then
what was it like, Chris, to have somebody who said, you know what, this guy's coming in, let's be honest, as a fighter at that point, as a tough guy, a guy who's going to go out there and protect his players, but he would not allow you just to be that one-dimensional guy. He said, no, we're gonna work on your game. What did that mean to you to have a guy who wanted to be there for you at those different levels?
Well, it meant the world because, you know, just to be used as a fighter, I couldn't have done my job. Honest to God, I wouldn't have been a happy hombre sitting on the bench, going out and fight and come back. And it wouldn't have worked. And, you know, I was driven to become a player, and I had all that help. And quite frankly, I think the organization, why I'm so grateful is because they weren't happy with just that. I think if I went to maybe another organization, okay, this kid's a fighter, let's just fight. That's all we want. They wanted me to be more, and they helped me do that. But in Jacques, you know, he bring me down in front of the net and right in the crease with a bunch of pucks, flip them up, forehand, backhand, under the bar. And he'd tell me, this is where you're going to score goals from. You got to be able to get the puck up over the goaltender, get it up quick. You need quick hands. So he'd work on that. And then in practice, we constantly did drills with pucks. And he one day he came to me, he said, how long do you think you get the puck in a game? And I'm there, a minute. You know, he goes, what? A minute? And then I stopped and thought, and I said, maybe 30 seconds. He said, what? He said, you're lucky if you have it on your stick for 10 seconds. Lucky.
Yeah.
And when I thought of it, and he said, the reason why I do all these drills with puck, because some guys are more natural with the puck, other guys aren't. Yeah. So when you get the puck, you have to do something good with it, not just throw it away, not just let it blow up on you. You have to do something good with it. So he stressed all that. And you know, he was also.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Because what that brings to mind right away was, so you're early in your days with the Habs, and there's an opportunity in a game against the Jets where Chris Nilan gets a penalty shot. And now you're a hero on that team. The fans love you because of what you do. The guys on the bench love you because you're always sticking up for them no matter what. And now you're awarded a penalty shot. Walk our audience through the way that all unfolded. What happened before you took the shot, and then how it all played out?
Well, it's funny. People couldn't believe I got a penalty shot, but I had improved my skating to the point where I could get up and down the ice pretty good. And I ended up getting a pass and cut inside of Randy Carlisle, and he yanked me down from behind with a hook, because you could kind of do that back in the day. And
you could. You could get the stick up and it was okay. Now the stick's parallel to the ice, you're toast.
So I get the penalty shot, and, you know, everybody's going nuts, and the place, everybody's on their feet. And I remember I was nervous as all hell. And guys on the bench, I looked over and they were kind of laughing, you know. And I remember Ludwig yelling, "Knuckles, dump it in," you know. And I'm like, oh, that's it. And I was just going out to get ready to get going. The goaltender got set, Brian Haywood, and Bob Gainey came to me and said, listen, don't listen to anybody. Do what you think is right. Just do what you think is right. And it settled me right down. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do what I think is right. And I went in and I faked shooting and then pulled it around him and threw it up on my backhand. And it was so funny. Brian Haywood got traded to us like 2 weeks later. And
it's your fault. You chased him out of town.
He comes walking in the room, and first thing I said to him, I goes, "What were you thinking?" He said, "I'm thinking this big dummy's going to come in and put his head down and shoot it right in my pads." And that's exactly what he thought, because once I dropped my head for a second like I was going to shoot it, and he froze, and I just went, it was actually easy. I couldn't believe.
To our viewers, you guys, you got to go on YouTube. It's on YouTube. You got to see it. The reaction. For me, I don't know what was more fun and amazing was watching you score the goal, which was a pretty goal. It was no fluke, or the freaking reception you got after the goal from your teammates. Go on YouTube, check it out. If you haven't seen it yet, to our viewers, you got to see it. And you know, and it wasn't isolated. Your coaching staff, your teammates, guys began to believe in you, and you were a big part of your sixth season in the NHL. Was the 85-86 season where the Habs won the Stanley Cup, and you were a huge part of it. You set an NHL record that still stands to this day, 141 penalty minutes in just 18 games in the playoffs, and yet you were a huge part of that Stanley Cup run. What are your memories of that?
geez, just, when we got started, Boston, going into Boston, and Boston was like, and then it was the best 3 out of 5, right? That first round, and it can end quick for you,
Yeah.
and we kind of own Boston, in the playoffs.
One of the great rivalries of all time.
Yeah, they weren't easy series, but we always ended up coming out on top, and we ended up sweeping them, which was kind of surprising that they didn't win one game, but we swept them. And then I just remember the Hartford series, and I remember Game 7. That's what I'll say. And I remember Babbage sitting on the bench, and he got the puck, and it was just about a minute left in the game, 59 seconds, and he shot it from the point, and in it went, and they tied the game at 2. And I remember going in the locker room and hearing all the cliches, everything at the net, everything forward, make sure hearing everything. And I remember that nervous feeling after they scored. We're like, oh my God, we let this one go, And sure enough, we come out, and Claude Lemieux ends up scoring that goal in Game 7 in overtime. It was incredible. He knocked the defenseman down his butt, grabbed the puck, come around, and put it upstairs. And I always say it, like, Patrick gets a lot of credit. We had the best defensive team in the league that year.
Yep.
In the NHL season. We had and I'm not taking anything away from Patrick Watt, but Claude Lemieux had as much to do with that Stanley Cup as Patrick did. When you look at, he had 5 game-winning goals, couple overtime goals, 1 in New York, 2. He was incredible. And, I remember, I guess for me, the Stanley Cup final, I ended up tearing ligaments in my ankle, and I tried to go that last game in Calgary. They froze my ankle, and I came in the room. I was so bummed out. And Big Serge said, sorry, you can't go, big boy. And I can go, the old. And he said, no, you can't. You have to think of the team. You have to put the team first. So
that's a good Savard imitation. I got to say, that's good.
Yeah, oh yeah. But believe me, I've heard enough of Serge that I could, I get it down good. And I remember Don Cherry kissing me on TV in between periods, telling me he loved me. And so, and
I'll tell you what came out of that was how critically important a role player like you could be in a Stanley Cup run. And it was, I think the Habs fans, your teammates, people understood that locally, but for the first time on the huge stage that was the Cup final, people really took recognition. And what did it end up doing? We're in conversation with Chris Nilan, Stanley Cup champion. It's a 7-11 overtime podcast. Right out of that, Team USA is prepping for the 87 Canada Cup. And listen, I don't think I'm saying anything out of school here. Probably before that Cup final, you're not thinking, hey, maybe one day I'll play for Team USA at the Canada Cup. But you got a phenomenal call and a conversation and an opportunity for Team USA. Tell our audience about that.
Yeah, Badger Bob reached out to me, Bob Johnson, God love him, and invited me.
One of the legends of all time. I love how you're mentioning, you're dropping all these names of guys who are among the legends of all time that are key parts of your life, eh?
Yeah, and the Badger, he just loved the game of hockey. He liked that hard, tough hockey, and I'll never forget. I'm in training camp, and I'm with Team USA, all happy, and I'm happy I'm there, and thinking, do I really get a shot at this? Brett Hull was there, right? Yep. And they end up coming down the last couple practices, and they're going to make cuts. And I remember after practice one day, everybody's down on a knee, and he said, we're playing. He's talking about the tournament, and he said, we got a pre-tournament schedule. We're playing Team Canada like 3 times or 4 times or something. And he said, we're going to need guys like Knuckles and Joel Otto against Team Canada, a big, tough team, and they're really talented. And I'm like, do I get a chance at this? And next thing, they make the cuts, and he ends up keeping me. And I remember Brett Hull he would come out in the newspaper and said something about how ridiculous it was that they kept me over him. And the fact of the matter is, Brett Hull was a fat bastard at training camp. He was fat and he was out of shape. He didn't deserve to be there. And Badger Bob saw that. And actually, when he went back to Calgary, he treated him the same way. You know, he had issues with him weight-wise. So regardless, I ended up making the team. And, you know, I had a decent tournament. I ended up, you know, I had 3 points for a slug like me, 2 goals and 1 assist in 5 games. I did my job. I provided my teammates with that security and knowing I was there. I played physical hockey, and it was awesome to be able to represent your country. It was so
It was
cool.
amazing. It was amazing.
I'm grateful to Bob for that.
Yeah. So we're talking about Jacques Lemaire, the impact that he had in a positive way. Badger Bob, legend, impact in a positive way. But sadly, there's some guys along the way who want to pigeonhole you, who want to say, this is what we need from Chris, and this is the role we need to play. And one of those guys was Jean Perron. It was no secret. This was a guy that kind of, you know, when he was running the organization for the Habs and running the bench, there were certain roles that he wanted you in and wasn't afraid to verbalize it. Tell us the story about when he came in, because there were times where coaches would literally come to you and others who played the style that you said and said, I need you to drop the gloves. I need you to fight. Tell us about Jean Perron and how that impacted you.
Well, it's funny. Gino, I always promised myself I would never let a coach tell me to go fight. And I'll go back to Bert Templeton. He never told me to fight in Maine. And Bert was one of those guys who loved to do that. Never once told me to fight. Bob Berry never once told me to fight. Claude Ruel. Jacques Lemaire told me I fought too much. And you should slow down a little. And I almost didn't trust him. And then when I got to Jean, he never told me to fight. And I always said to myself, if a coach does that, I'm going to have it out with him right away. And we were in Hartford, and we were going through a tough time, and he went around the room and started pointing this guy and that guy. And he came to me, he said, and Chris Nilan, when's the last time you had a fight? And so I had some words for him in front of everybody, and he didn't like that. And he ended up calling Serge, and I ended up, we were going to Buffalo after Hartford, and I would remember the morning skate. I was on the line with Bob and Cabo, and that morning I was I was in a different jersey, and I wasn't on that line, so I knew something was up. And that was my ticket out of Montreal. Now, that almost broke me. And like I've said,
can I just pause you for a sec? That was the trade you got dealt to the New York Rangers in January of 1988, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
And it almost broke me, but I didn't let it. But I'm telling you, I don't know how guys get traded. I was so passionate about the Canadians and so into that organization, and just it was everything to me. And when I got traded, I remember waking up in New York, and I was like, how'd I get here? And I always had to remember, and I got to stay true to myself. And and that's what got me through. Like I always said, if I'm not going to have, listen, I have respect for everybody. But if you're not showing me any respect, if someone's going to disrespect me, you're not getting it back from me. You're not getting respect back from me. And I've always stayed true to that. And it crushed me. And like I said, it almost broke me, but I got through it. I don't believe I was ever quite the same as far as passionately playing for a team or being connected to a team. I played for the Rangers, then I went to Boston, but it was never the same. Listen, I stuck up for my teammates. I still did the best I could, but there was something about that logo for me and that organization, how deeply ingrained it was in me. I wasn't the same.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate the openness. For those who missed it, go back and take a look at it. It's a real classic eye opener, and every hockey fan should see what a tough guy like yourself has to go through. Was the movie The Last Gladiators, where And I've never had a chance to say thank you for this. Thank you for your openness and honesty that you shared in that, talking about how difficult it is to be pigeonholed like that, how difficult it is day in and day out to do what you did, the pain that you suffered, the way you try to mask that pain through the addiction battle that you went through, painkillers, and then ultimately how that even increased to heroin use at what point. At what point did you realize that there was a spiral happening and things were starting to go downhill for you?
It's really hard to get to that point, and that's why I was stuck in it for the amount of time I was. I was so busy on just trying to stay well and not be sick that but I had a car accident on my way to Montreal that I flipped my vehicle and got ejected to it and almost got killed. And I was unconscious on the side of the road, and I remember waking up, and it shook me to the core. And it wasn't long after that. That was in December, early December of 2008. And it wasn't long after that I made a phone call to ask for some help, and I got that help, and I ended up going off to treatment back in 2009. So, there were times in my addiction that I knew I was stuck in this thing. I didn't know how to get out of it. I knew nothing about drug and alcohol treatment. I heard of Alcoholics Anonymous and all that stuff, but I didn't think it applied to me because I knew I had a problem with prescription medication, but medication that I was prescribed that I thought was helping me with the pain I was in. I've had a ton of surgeries, and all I knew is when I didn't have those pills, I was sick as a dog and felt like I was going to die. And then once I got them in my system, I felt normal. It wasn't like I was high or I was whacked out. All I did was feel normal. So it took the pain away. And when you're swept up in that and you don't know how to get out of that, it's a horrendous place to be. And I was there. It wasn't fun. It was miserable, but I'm glad and grateful that I found my way out, and I had help doing it.
You had a lot of help. You had good people surrounding you. And I want to continue with looking at people in your life who played major roles that share to the extent that you want to about Jamie Holtz and what that meant for you and others maybe along the line that, well, you tell us.
Yeah, she's incredible. Well, it started with Dan Cronin, the NHL. Bob Gainey actually gave me his card a few years before, saying, listen, I know you've struggled sometime. There's a guy who might be able to help you out at the NHL. And I called Dan Cronin. And it's funny, when I called Dan, he said, who's this? I said, it's Chris Nilan. He said, I've been waiting for your phone call. So, wow. Meanwhile, I think no one knows that I'm messed up and they really don't know what's going on with me. But, and I went to treatment, got well, and then I had a relapse. And I had met Jamie out in Oregon. She got out of treatment and I had got out of treatment, and we started dating and seeing each other. And we relapsed. She went back to Hawaii. And I went back to Boston, and I was struggling. I was stuck, and living in a hotel, and just every day. I had a difficult time getting the Oxycontin at the time, and I ended up on heroin, and I was just going nowhere fast. And Jamie and I had met. We certainly had intense feelings for one another, and we hit it off really good. And she went back and got well, and I was stuck. And I was stuck for about 7 months. I was struggling. She was so worried I was going to die. She was cutting off contact with me, and finally she called me and said I have a ticket for you. I want you to come here and see this addictionologist and meet with him. He was a former Vietnam veteran, and he was an addict himself. And she said, promise me one thing, you don't show up here messed up. And that was going to be a chore in and of itself, because I had a 14-hour flight, and I was going to be sick. And I showed up there, I was sick as a dog. And I ended up meeting with him the next day, got back on the horse, and got going again. And I'll be forever grateful for that. She was a big part of dragging me out of that hotel room and get me to a place where someone could get my attention again. And yeah, it's amazing what she did for me. I love her to death. She's been such a strong person in my life, which has helped me, and we've helped each other in a lot of ways. So we got a great relationship. I love her to death. Yeah, I'm not letting her go.
I appreciate your honesty so much, because the thing that goes in my mind is there may be somebody out there right now who's going through struggles, maybe not exactly the same struggles, but other battles, saying there's something they're trying to overcome. Is there a message? Is there a first step? Like, everybody's looking for that first step. Is there a message where you would give to somebody who may be struggling in their own journey right now, where you could give them an idea of how to begin the process?
It starts with getting honest with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself. You got to admit that you have a problem. That's the most difficult thing, and you got to admit that you can't manage your life anymore because of this, and you got to be willing to get honest with yourself. And if you can't, then that's really, for me, was the first step. That I do have a drug problem. I want to do something about it. I want to change my life. And there's that possibility, and it's there. The door can open for you, but you got to be willing to get honest with yourself and admit to yourself that you have a problem. And that was hard for me for the longest time.
Yeah.
And it's hard for a lot of people, and I get it. Yeah.
Your honesty is amazing. I mean, you made a point yourself of saying your dad taught you never lie. You would never lie. Your honesty right now. Your podcast, for example, you could just call it the Chris Nilan podcast. You could ignore the fighting part of it, but you call it the Raw Knuckles podcast. Raw because you're not holding anything back. Knuckles because you're acknowledging that was a big part of who you were. And yet you're using that as a tool to talk to people, to enjoy, to have a good conversation, but you're never one to shy away. How important has this podcast been in your health and continuing to move forward for you?
Well, listen, I got into this podcast world, certainly because I kind of had to.
Is it cathartic?
What's that?
Is it cathartic for you to get it all out there, just to kind of make you feel like it's a part of the process for you?
Yeah, in a sense. Listen, I was at TSN for 10 years. They let me go because I wouldn't get vaccinated. I accept that. That's life. I made a choice, and they made their choice, and I get that. And when the door closed there, I'm now, okay, what am I going to do next? And it's funny you brought up The Last Gladiators. The producer of that, Barry Reese, and I stayed friends over the years. And when I lost my job at TSN, we had talked, and he said, "Yeah, have you ever thought of doing a podcast?" And I said, "Yeah, I've thought about it, but now I'm in a position where I think I might have to if I want to move forward." And he said, "Listen, I'll help you produce it. I have a production company."
Awesome.
From Pittsburgh, and away we went. And he helped me out. He helped me get back on my feet. Helped me, learn how to monetize it and be able to make a few dollars at doing it. And it's not easy. I never think it's going to happen, but we're right on the precipice of that right now.
That's awesome.
December 1st. So it's been a lot of work, but I love doing it. I had fun doing it. I think the toughest part for me is, getting guests. I say the toughest part. Usually when I call someone, people are pretty good. Hockey guys are great, actually, the best. But, it's still, I feel like sometimes I'm being a pain in the butt asking people. But, for it to survive, that's what I have to do. And I think I could do a little more, just me talking, and Tim talking about hockey, but we've been pretty guest oriented, and I like doing that. I like interacting with people, I like talking. I like find out what makes people tick, how they got where they got. We had John Cooper on. We haven't released it yet, but I had John Cooper on a couple of weeks ago. I had Marty Walsh, director of the NHLPA, really awesome, two awesome guys. I know Marty from Boston to begin with, but John Cooper, I've admired from far. And when I had him on, I'm telling you, I absolutely loved it. I call him Super Duper Johnny Cooper, because he is. This guy, what an incredible story. A lot of people don't know that story. Hockey people, some do. Some of the fans don't have a clue how he got to where he got and how successful he's become. We see that. But the road he took was it's an amazing story. So I love doing that. Yeah.
Well, because you're a great storyteller, and the only thing that's critical about having a great storyteller is you can't just be a great storyteller. You got to have great stories, and you've got both, which is amazing. You've had some incredible people along your journey. I want to do something that we call 5 Fast Facts, where it's going to give you an opportunity to acknowledge some people quickly in your past who may have contributed. So, but I want to try to catch you off guard if I can with these questions. So you give me a quick 5 answers. You ready to play?
Yep.
All right. 5 Fast Facts. The best teammate that you ever played with?
Chelios.
Wow. Who was the best coach you ever played for?
Jacques Lemaire.
Who did you hate playing against the most, and why?
Gary Risling.
Because?
He was yappy, he was ugly, and he was a pain in the ass.
Fair enough. You played in some great NHL cities. What was your favorite NHL city to play in?
Ooh, Boston.
Oh, well, yeah.
Well, no, Montreal, but
yeah.
Montreal. But I thought you meant away from Montreal.
Yeah,
Montreal.
Fair enough. If you hadn't become an NHL player, what do you think Plan B would have been for you in terms of a career?
I think I would have been a Green Beret.
Wow. Wow, you got to explain that one to me.
My dad was a Green Beret. He was a sergeant major, paratrooper, and all that. I often think I would have liked to have been a Navy SEAL. My niece's husband is a SEAL. I coached him in hockey as a young kid. But I don't know if I could have made the SEALs. And I only say that because I have claustrophobia. And you have to be able to get in one of them little mini subs. Yeah. I think I could have done everything else but that. And
but don't even talk about that. That scares the crap out of me, even thinking about that.
Yeah, but I honestly, probably went the military route.
Awesome. It's been unbelievable chatting with you, man. You look so good. It's so nice to hear you doing so well. I want to ask you about, and I mentioned we talked about key impactful people in your life, Jamie and Jock, and we talked about a lot of but there's somebody else that I want you to have an opportunity to mention, and I love this about you. It's Adele. Tell our audience about Adele and the impact Adele plays in your life.
Adele, I'm telling you, that dog, Saint Bernard, she is 130 pounds of pure love. If you want to know what love is, you gotta meet Adele. It is incredible. I became such a dog person. They've done so much. Dogs just love you. They love you. They love you. They love you. That's it. And you got to care for them like they're young children. And I just love doing that. Dog's been a big part of my life since I got sober. I had another dog, Bodie, who was huge in my recovery, actually. He helped me deal with a lot of anger issues and stuff like that. I mean, every time I'd be watching a hockey game and I'd get excited at something, he would come over and just sit next to me and look at me like, calm down. And dogs played such a big role in my recovery too. I love them. Adele, awesome. She's the best. She's awesome.
Awesome. I've deliberately stayed away from calling you Knuckles. During my broadcasting career, during my career as a fan, that's all I ever referred to you as. But in getting to know you over the last 10 or 15 years. And in this conversation, I just feel like you're Chris. You're Chris. You're Chris. You're genuine. You are who you are. I cannot tell you how excited I am to see where you are in this journey now. And I can't wish you anything but the best. And on behalf of people whose lives you're continuing to touch today, through your journey, through your battles with addiction and coming out of it on the other side. Thank you. Thanks for what you're doing, pal. I
Gino,
really appreciate this.
Thank you for the heartfelt comments. I really appreciate it. And it's funny, the Chris, Knuckles, I got that nickname in college, from a good friend of mine, and it stuck right through the NHL. And, it's funny. I don't know. Some people call me Knuckles. Some people call me Chris. One thing, my mother always called me Christopher. And I appreciate the kind words, and, Knuckles, Chris, whatever. And I guess I'll never live that nickname down as long as I live, but that's okay.
But you've earned so much more, my friend. Thank you so much for this. Be well. Take care of yourself.
Thanks so much, buddy. All the best.
A true gentleman. 13 years in the NHL, a Stanley Cup champion with the Montreal Canadiens, Chris Nilan. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven and Athlete's Care. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee, fresh 100% premium Arabica coffee, hot from the oven pizza and wings, pint of ice cream, or even a carton of milk, a dozen eggs, and a loaf of bread from the 7 Now app. And Team 7-Eleven will have your order ready for you. Pick up 24/7. Athlete's Care is proud to be celebrating its 25th year, offering sports medicine services to both elite athletes and the general population who require rehab for a new or chronic injury or pain. Go to where the best go. Athlete's Care. Sports medicine clinics with 24 locations in the Greater Toronto Area and Ottawa. Hey, if you miss any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. 7-Eleven's Overtime Podcast can be found on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Until next week, I'm Gino Reda saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast.